Okay, well,
Mhm.
okay. Well, I'll start. I'm Vikki Reynolds, and I'm a clinical supervisor and I guess an activist therapist, and I'm here with Tara Taylor, the downtown east side of Vancouver, and Zoe Dodd from Toronto, both working in responding to the opiate catastrophe. And we're going to have a witnessing of. We wanted to do a solidarity interview with Zoe Dodd, just to get to the kind of the heart of your work. And I just think it's so inspiring for folks in terms of believed in hope. And when
Mm.
people throw up their hands and say, we can't do anything, I'm like, you want to talk to somebody who is doing something with nothing. Like I think I think it would be really helpful. And I have
Yeah.
respect for Tara, for what you're doing, in the downtown east side and other places. And I think you're a great witness for this conversation. So maybe everybody could just introduce themselves.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead, Zoe.
Okay, so I'm Zoe Dodd, and I live and work in Toronto, which is on the territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently the Mississauga of the Credit River. And I've been living in these territories for over 20 years now, and I moved here from the Whitehorse, Yukon, actually, which is where my mother and one of my sisters still lives today. So I've been working in the downtown east of Toronto for 17 years and have been focused mostly around issues related to poverty, substance use, housing, and like just being a drug user advocate for almost the entirety of that time. So so thanks for having me on here.
Thanks. So my name is Tara. I've been working in the downtown east side of Vancouver for around 15 or so years, mostly with a focus in social justice and harm reduction. And, it kind of just changes, I don't know, with each new health emergency that comes this way, it changes what we're doing. And just wanted to acknowledge that we're working and living on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Sabletooth. Yeah, and I'm excited to have this conversation. So thank you for the invite.
Thanks. Zoe, just how did you start to do this work? How'd you get here?
I was like living in a kind of really unhealthy relationship in my 20s. I'd moved out here to kind of escape my life and wanted something different. And I came out to Toronto. I'd never been here before. I just got on a plane and just did that. I was really struggling and had I play music. I used to play music a lot. I was in punk bands and I don't know. My friend was going to school and she said, do you want to go to school? And that's something I always wanted to do. It just wasn't felt like it was in my journey. So when she decided she was going, I was like, yeah, I think community worker, that sounds cool. I went with her for 1 year. They had student placements. I knew I wanted to work in the community. There's issues around homelessness, poverty, using drugs are things that I've grown up with and understood from a personal experience. So the opportunity to get a student placement, I took it. And then while I was there, they liked me so much. I really wanted to do their Hep C program. So when I started working there, I started working with people with hepatitis C, and I just could not believe that people with Hep C were excluded from getting treatment for Hep C because they use drugs. And that became my focus. And so when they said, do you want to get hired here? And I was going to work on a crack user project. I'd gotten involved with the Safer Crack Use Coalition. And I couldn't believe it. My first meeting, everyone's sitting around talking about crack. And I was like, what the hell? This is so cool. And I was telling my boss at the time my experience with smoking meth. And I just couldn't believe you could be in a space where you could talk about your own drug use and be hired for it. So, and it's just sort of just happened, and I was still playing music, working in a record store, and leaving this unhealthy relationship, and all of that just happened. And as soon as I got a harm reduction job, I was like, yeah, so I'm not leaving this. This is where I can actually do a lot of social justice work. This is where I can fight for community. This is where I can make change, all the things I dream about. I can be influential in. I can help people live and survive and thrive. And so I quit school. I didn't even finish. I just took that job straight out and moved into my own place and then got a full-time job there, doing a crack user project and the Hep C program.
Yeah, that's amazing because I know that you just finished a master's, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. Like, that is like, when I was young, I was like, in my family, the most academically inclined. But, if you don't have family members that like talk to you about university or understand university, or you go to schools that don't talk to you because they don't expect you to go to university, then you miss out on secondary education. And so that was something I always wanted to do when I was younger, but it wasn't like going to be part of my journey. It wasn't something that was attainable for me. I had to survive as a teenager. So, I decided 2 years ago, I was supposed to be having a break from work and applied to do a master's right after Rafi Balian died. And then I ended up doing my master's and working full time and helping run the illegal injection site at Moss Park at the same time instead.
Yeah.
But yeah, I finished it.
Well, it's interesting because school is definitely not the thing that qualified you. And then you ended up actually from the work going to school.
Yeah.
But when you and I were talking at that time in some consultations we had, you were also talking about like, you felt like you had to go to school to get some of this work out, right?
Yeah, like it was more so I could put what was interesting to me and be like, I want to spend a focus on looking at drug treatment specifically and how the drug treatment system has been an effective tool at perpetuating this drug war myth that all drugs are bad, so we have to continue to criminalize people and make them illegal. And so I wanted to spend 2 years sort of like investigating how the drug treatment system worked and operated, looking at it as a system of control and enforcement and criminalization. And that's what I did. So I specifically looked at people who'd been mandated to drug treatment, but I asked them specifically about the programs that were mandated to, since their freedom was so tied to it, whether they were going to have their kids back, get their job back, or like stay out of prison. And so that's what I spent time doing. And I just had never had the time to do that. And I really enjoyed it. Yeah. And that for me, it's not about getting the piece of paper so much as it was like about just getting that experience of spending time thinking about ideas.
Yeah. And I was thinking when we were having conversations while you were in school about what an active resistance it was for you to go to school. The first thing, which is I think something all of us share, which is that class positioning, that we're not the families that go to school. We're not invited into those spaces. It's always weird to me that I'm an adjunct professor now. It's just weird because it's not a fit. But I just think, but it is a fit. And, for me, one of the reasons I became a prof and started to teach was we needed to have a voice that was taking this stuff apart. And, there was like that real point of connection with you. And I know Tara's also gone to school to do the same thing. We need to get enough credentials to get listened to, but while we're in there, we're going to contaminate the shit out of that. And I know that's like a lot of, and you've published a lot of stuff as well. That's actually really important in, banging against those dominant discourses of what is knowledge and what the quote best practices are, right?
Well, yeah, because before I used to like everything, they would ask you for your credentials and I would use IDMJ, I do my job, as my like credentials. And everyone used to joke with me about that. I was like, no, I'm serious. Like what I know is from experience, what I know is from actually doing the work, which is like the majority of people I know. We have a lot of knowledge. We're not like just studying it in school. We are just like living it. And then, I've been involved in research ever since I started in harm reduction because I felt like we should be producing our own knowledge base and putting forward our own ideas. So, like I'm really proud of one research project I did, which was like actually looking at my own groups that I was facilitating, which I facilitated for 15 years, that looked at group cohesion and therapeutic alliance and submitted that to the Journal of Group Psychotherapy and had a whole section on popular education and mutual aid in my paper because, I thought that's something that people should learn about. Like, here's an opportunity to slip that in and teach people about Paulo Freire. Like, why not? That's who inspires me.
It's amazing. When you think about, so education is kind of an act of resistance, a site of resistance for you, but also a place for you to push things forward. Bell Hooks talks about that. The fact that theorizing is a piece of activism. And I was really drawn. I was like, what are we doing in the academy? We should just be on the street, but we need kind of both, like we need some theorizing. And then, Noam Chomsky is saying that action without theorizing is just, can really cause a lot of troubles, but theorizing without any action is just like totally unethical, right? So I like that combination that you're talking about. And I'm thinking about, you go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and it's like when I started in hepatitis C, I wanted to run groups, but I didn't really know how to do that. But I'd never really even participated in groups myself. But I thought, well, I know a lot from like organizing, and I know some things from reading like about popular education. And I think what's important here is for people to understand that they're not a failure because they can't access hep C treatment, that actually the system is a system of oppression, and that what they're experiencing is state oppression, and that the state doesn't care whether they live or die, or that doctors have made a decision based on morality to not allow them to do treatment because there's no evidence to say that they couldn't do hep C treatment.
Yeah.
And so I use the theories of popular education to help people understand their positionality in the world so that they understood that these are what the systems are. So teaching people about hep C, but then also teaching them about who these decision makers are, why these decisions are getting made, so that people had a different understanding. And I like the theories of popular education because I think that helps oppressed people to understand more about these systems and how we fight against them, how we can change them, and how it's not about themselves, but about like a much larger issue.
Yeah, it's cool. When you think about, so education's not the thing that gets you there. I love that IDMG, I do my job. What is it, what is it that actually qualifies you for the work? What would you say what are the things that make you a valid person to do that job?
I think experience of not everybody has experience that does harm reduction work in terms of using drugs. I do think that's helpful. I do think also it's just helpful. I think what makes, knowing the systems and also having a desire for that system to change. I think majority of people I know in harm reduction aren't just in it. So it's like, we want to reduce the transmission of HIV and hep C. No, actually we want the drug war to end. Yeah. And that is like the political ideology that a lot of people hold who are doing harm reduction work. And that's what makes you a good worker, it's that belief that the systems that we work in and the jobs that we have can actually be oppressive and that they actually shouldn't even exist. And in order for them not to exist, we as workers have to work against the system to change it. So I believe in this theory by John Holloway, who's a socialist, which is a theory called working within, against, and beyond. So you're working within it, you're working beyond it, and you're working against it. And I always apply that to the work I'm doing. And I think anybody who's doing this kind of work should be applying that too. So, and that's in everything, fighting for access for other workers, for equal wages, to wanting to end the drug war and change drug policy. And that's why I always do advocacy in all the work I do. It's not just my job.
Yeah. Look, walk us back a little bit. When the shit hit the fan and it became obvious this wasn't just a bad run of dope and it wasn't just a couple of people dying, that we were in the midst of a catastrophe. You're one of the people that started an illegal tent in Toronto. How did that come about? How'd that come about?
Yeah, so Toronto is so different from Vancouver because we're I live in a bit more of a conservative city. So, and we don't have these organizations to help us push things forward in the same ways as Vancouver does. And so we were inspired by what happened in Vancouver with the Overdose Prevention Society opening a tent. And we all talked about wanting to open a tent here for a year. The overdose crisis here started 5 years ago, around the same time it started in Vancouver, but we just didn't get attention because we didn't have the data to show. And so this data here is really far behind. And it was always being used against us, well, we can't show that. We had our Chief Medical Officer of Health, David Williams. He was at an opioid symposium saying that Ontario didn't have fentanyl. Meanwhile, people we knew had already died of fentanyl overdoses. And so it was really this uphill battle of getting any response. And so at that time, the government were the Liberals. They had no interest in addressing the overdose crisis. And we were waiting for exemptions to happen here for the safe rejection sites, which I was on the policy at my workplace to get a supervised injection site here. I sat on that for 6 years. So we had to have all this patience. Meanwhile, all these people are dying around us, including our own coworkers and friends of mine. So it was in August of 2017 that the police, so Toronto Public Health, we've always asking them, you got to put out alerts. If we have a rash of deaths, it's your role. But they didn't do that. They weren't doing that. We still don't have a proper drug alert system here. So the police put out this bulletin in August 2017 at the beginning of the month and said, all these people died over the weekend. And then the mayor called for this meeting with frontline workers, but he only called for a meeting between EMS and fire and paramedics, and not us on the ground, who've been saying for years, we have a crisis. It's just like BC. It's just like Vancouver. Please acknowledge that this is happening here. And then we forced a meeting with the mayor. We had this meeting with the mayor. And then like the next day or that night, like after the meeting with the mayor, we all realized that if we didn't take action, nothing was going to happen. It was the same of us telling everyone in the room what's going on, and nobody's actually going to do anything for us. And then we were really had been talking to Sarah Blythe, and we were really inspired by just like the thought of just opening something. And then the next day we went to the Toronto Harm Reduction Alliance meeting, told everybody in the room, hey, this thing that you've wanted to do for a year, we've set up a GoFundMe the week before. Lee Chapman did that. We started fundraising money. And then that day we said, I just got on the phone. We're buying tents. We're doing this. We're doing that. And then the next day we're in the park and we'd opened up the site. We thought something that would last a weekend actually lasted almost a year. And we weren't totally prepared for that. We thought like, okay, we'll go. But then once we realized the police were going to let us stay, we just did a kind of a call out to people to help us, and people just came. We had 150 volunteers while we did that.
It's amazing.
It's wild.
I'm thinking about how many workers and how many sites I go into where people tell me they're listening to the constraints, like, we can't do that. We have policies here.
Yeah.
That's not possible here. And I just think about like this, you know, this landscape of possibility where you're just seeing need and you're responding to that like an activist, as opposed to, you know, a social worker or any of us employed, you know. And I'm just thinking, what does it take from you? You know, what is it about you and your colleagues and people you're in solidarity with that made this happen? Because and like you said, Sarah Blythe and some other folks had got that going in Vancouver, but we have some history. We've got a culture of harm reduction, even in the city here, right? With the 4 pillars. So we've got that and you didn't. So I'm just thinking, what did it take from you to do this?
Well, I think we do have that. The thing is about like Toronto is like, we don't get recognized for the stuff we do in the same way everyone talks about Vancouver, right? So like, for instance, safer crack kits, those came from Toronto. We created those. Yeah. And everyone has them around the world now, but we didn't tell people. We're just like, oh, here's the thing that we just do. Yeah. And then with supervised consumption, like even with like safer supply, and you know, we don't do observed dosages here. People get daily dispensed because that's what we wanted to do here. So we can watch certain things, but then there are things that become very bureaucratic, that they're not exactly how you'd want to do them. So it's like kind of interesting to watch how other people do them first. So that was the same with like being at work on the safe injection site, creating the policies. I'm like, man, this is just ruining drug culture. It's so rigid. You can't pass your drugs. You can't share your drugs. You can't help someone inject. Like, just so many rules that are like, you got to sit at a booth. Like, these are like rules that are imposed because a supervised injection site is really a concession, because we have a problem with the drug supply and homelessness. Like, a lot of people use supervised injection sites are homeless. Yeah. And people should be able to do drugs in their own homes, but that's not the reality for lots of people. So yeah. I think what it gives us and what it has given us when we don't have all these authorities, it has given us the privilege and the ability to then say, oh yeah, we're just going to do this our way. So when we open the site, we helped people inject. We ejected people if they needed assistance. We let people pass and share. We let them sit together. And that sort of formed the basis of how all the sites looked. They didn't have to be so clinical. It didn't have to be so rigid, because we had examples of where it wasn't like that. So we just expanded on that, which then I think helped influence. So like pure assisted injection, while we were in the park, we did our own research. We did a whole study on pure assisted injection, because we were like, this is a thing that they don't want to allow. So let's do research to show that's really beneficial, and then push for that to happen. So then there's like a pilot in all the sites. And so I think it's, you know, by just doing it, you get the opportunity to like skip a lot of the bureaucratic red tape around the things that, you know, are the ways people really want them done, or they, you know, that this, you know, that people want to make something so overly medicalized for something that's also very social and cultural experience.
Yeah, no, it's true. What do you take from you as a person? What do you think it is about you? Some of your allies, but like, I am asking about you.
I've always been like this since I was a little kid. I
And
don't know. If
and
I
like
see
what?
like something that feels like an injustice, I've like always, and honestly, I spent like a lot of my 20s like incredibly depressed, like just like this cannot be the world that we live in, and I just want to contribute to changing it, and like how do I do that? And I would read a lot, and I was like really struggling in poverty, and then getting into harm reduction kind of gave me that platform to like help change things. Like, I helped create a hepatitis C program. I met a doctor, I introduced me to other people. He trained all these other doctors. We brought hepatitis C into primary care in 2006. And now like hepatitis C is in primary care more and more. It should have spread further, but just seeing that there's solutions to problems, and like, that's what I want to be a part of. And as personally, just how I've been since I was really small and continue to be. And
Yeah.
I don't know, like, yeah, it's weird. I don't know.
It's really hard to
I can't
talk
help it.
about, but I think no one taught you how to do this. And then on another level, social activism has always, cultures of resistance have always been teaching us how to do this, right? When you talk
Yeah.
about popular education, like we're on the shoulders of like communities of struggle, right? So I'm just thinking it's really interesting when you talk about, being depressed for a whole bunch of time. I'm wondering about, the acts of resistance in that. Like, are you oppressed or are you depressed?
Yeah. I remember like actually you having a conversation about that. You came here and did a workshop about that, and I went to see a new doctor, and immediately she wanted to put me on antidepressants, and I said to her, it's not depression, it's oppression. And she laughed at me, and I was like, no, I'm serious. Like, I don't want to try that right now, because I'm just dealing with so much that I recognize the feelings I have and how I'm feeling is really related to the situation of what's occurring. And though I'm not like opposed to people doing that, that's just not what I'm interested in right at this moment. But it really was really helpful in framing that.
Yeah. But your whole life you've been a fighter, like and not just about fights, but about, like, it seems what you're saying is you've had to address things you think are wrong, that where you think people are being oppressed. Like that's,
Yeah.
where did that come from? Who taught you that?
No, I think I taught myself a lot when I was younger, because in my family I wasn't allowed to speak up about certain things.
Okay.
And so like even
Yeah.
when when I was younger, my family broke down, and my mom moved us to the Yukon in a midnight move. Then she had like these horrible oppressive boyfriends who instead of just listening to them, I would fight with them. And my siblings would get really mad, like, can you stop fighting with them? I was like, no, I can't, because it's just wrong. How they treat us, how we're being treated is just wrong, and I can't stop. And I couldn't stop. And so, you end up getting kicked out of the house because of that, or like so many things. But I stayed true to myself, and I still, like, today would do the same thing again, like just like fought, because I felt like because I was being oppressed. And so I think then also punk, like I was really involved in music and just listening to like anarcho-punk as a kid, but really inspired by that. And it's actually, and I also had this uncle when I was younger who unfortunately died when I was 15, who talked to me like an adult, and he would tell me about all sorts of stuff. Like, he was in Berlin when the wall came down. Like, he would like talk, he was in the poll tax riots in England, and so he would just talk to me about stuff, and I'd be like, oh wow, really? That's so cool. Just like read things, look things up, and think, yeah, that's the kind of world I want to live in. Like,
Beautiful.
I have like a revolutionary spirit. I have this radical spirit that just doesn't believe in living in a system that is so authoritarian and capitalistic and selfish. And yeah, I think I've always believed that since I was very small. Like, I never wanted to move to Ontario because I was scared of acid rain, and like, and when we moved to the Yukon, I got involved in like organizing around against wolf kills, because they would shoot wolves from aerial planes, and I would go to these leadership conferences in Alaska as a youth to talk about wolf kills. I just thought it was so wrong, because at school, when they dissected a wolf in front of us in our science class, and I watched this kid put his hand into the wolf and pull out the heart, lift it in the air, and I was like crying, like, this is so wrong. Like, why are they shooting wolves from planes? But
Yeah.
I can't help it. It's in me.
You can't help it, it's in me. I'm just wondering, would it be okay if we just, I wanted to ask Tara about anything she's heard here, reflecting or connecting on. Is that
Yeah, sure.
That's great. Tara, what are you connecting with? What are you thinking? Points of connection? And there's so many connections between both of you and your work.
Yeah, there is for sure. I don't know. I kind of was in the moment. Just was listening to a lot of it. I tried to take some notes to make sure I could reflect back to it, and like a couple of things that pop up for me where I'm finding points of connection is you named like August 2017 as being as a time, and that was around a time I was thinking of stepping out of the work. I was pretty close to stepping out of the work, and then I drove across Canada with some stakes. We're trying to get to Parliament because we're trying to demand a conversation with our Prime Minister to talk about it. I grew up in the harm reduction and activism of Vancouver, so I actually had no idea that the rest of Canada was so fucked. You know what I mean? And we drove across Canada, and I connected with a ton of communities that were trying to fight the opiate epidemic that was happening and had no support or no help. And it made me angry. It made me stay in the work. So that was a big time for me, was August 2017, and definitely we hit up the park when we were there for a bit, that was I think day 6 or 7 of across Canada, and we had a couple more days to go, and so that definitely stood out. And listening to you talk a bit about that there. A question that kind of popped up for me a couple times that we can either get into it or come back to it. Like Vikki had asked you what got you in the work, why you do the work and stuff. I don't know. I think something that I would like to know is what keeps you in the work. Like I think about how hard it must be, and then you're like doing school. Like there's like other than you talking about that you've always had the fight. What is it about this fight that's kept you in it? Other than the fact that we're losing all of our friends and coworkers, and we know that it's just as easy as stopping the drug war. So that's something I wouldn't mind hearing a bit more about. I think those are kind of some of the points that stood out for me in that conversation.
I was thinking about qualifications, and your work, Tara. We just yesterday we had connected about how, you came to this work feeling, quote, kind of unqualified because you didn't have any paper behind you. You had a lifetime of work, right? I'm just thinking about that. Like for me, there were huge connections. Can you speak to that? About how you got in this?
How I got in it?
Yeah, because it's always an amazing road.
I don't know, I just couldn't imagine not being in it. Like I lived in Vancouver. I mean, I still do. I was living in Strathcona, and what I'd seen was like blocks and blocks of the downtown east side. And then in the short time I was seeing gentrification, like all the things, I couldn't not do the work. But I definitely psyched myself out and didn't get into the work. Instead I worked with Vikki at Peak House in the kitchen because I had a lot of kitchen work. To get the experience of what it is to work in frontline, and then did frontline at a couple soup kitchens, and then just kind of quickly made my way through that and back and then into the front lines. But I definitely didn't have any education, and so didn't think that, because that's what all the job postings were, like masters of this or bachelor of this, and it wasn't even anything. And then Vikki actually, I wouldn't say it saved my career, but saved my career in a bit. There was a time I applied for a management job and was definitely qualified for it, but was told I didn't have a degree, and so I couldn't. They were going to give it to somebody with a degree. So I asked Vikki, what's the quickest degree I can get? Like I just did. I was just like, what's the fastest? And Vicky's like, maybe you're working for the wrong people. Like that's and and then eventually that organization a year later asked if I'd come back and actually work at the job that they had told me I wasn't qualified for. And that was a big wake up that I didn't need a degree.
But also you did something else with that, Tara, in terms of acts of resistance, because you didn't just say, I want you to let me in the door. You said, I need you guys to to acknowledge lived experience and stop asking for degrees.
Yeah, I did. I named it.
You're not going to make an exception for me. This is the way we're going to work with, quote, peers, right?
Mm-hmm. It felt important to it would be a missed opportunity not to make them name why it is that they wanted me to do the job, or had brought me back, asked me to come back to do it.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. So I think that's fabulous. Zoe, what do you think about that question? Like, what is it that keeps you in the work?
I don't know. I don't like it. I think what keeps me in the work is it's hard, but it would be harder not to do it. It would be harder to just continue to you know, we're now in COVID, and it's really showing to a lot of people just the amount, you know, like austerity and neoliberalism have been a part of my whole entire life.
Yeah.
That's since the 80s. Cuts have been a part of our lives, and the destruction of the social fabric and the end to social housing, and just all these things. And like, so many people around me and myself have struggled, and I just am not accepting that of those terms, that is just like what we have to live in. I don't believe it. I don't believe people should believe it. And I always have believed that people have power, and that those people who are the most like oppressed by these systems have the ability and the power to rise up against those systems or change those systems or whatever it is. And so I think harm reduction to me isn't just, it's very political work. And I'm just like, I can't stop, because there is so much that is so oppressive that I personally just want to stay in it and keep doing it. I'm not burnt out.
No.
I've never been burnt out. I get really burnt out by the system, and I go into dark periods of grief and loss and mourning. But that also becomes a fuel to keep fighting. And part of that fuel comes also from spite. So if I feel really spiteful about something, that is like an energy I hone, and I'm like, I'm targeting that, and I won't lie about it. I get very spiteful. I'm like, oh man, I'm going for this. You know, I felt spiteful about academics, like just stealing our knowledge, like just coming in and being like, we're just taking this. We never had to experience this. We've never worked frontline. Some of them have never even talked to a human, because they're doing like quantitative research. They don't even talk to people. And that made me feel spiteful and made me want to go to school. So I could be like, yeah, I want to do that too. But like, I'm going to show you how to, but yeah, I shouldn't have had to get a degree to do that. But I also didn't have to do an undergrad. So
Yeah.
I like feel good about that. But yeah, spite is a funny one.
Spite,
Anger.
but spite's a funny word. I wonder about a just anger.
It's maybe just anger. Like, there definitely is anger. It's probably more anger than it is spite, to be honest. Because like, do find that anger is like a really good fuel that I harness. So if I am angry, like I can feel completely burnt out, and just like, even today, I didn't really want to do the interview today because on Sunday I lost 2 friends, and then on Monday I didn't go to work. I couldn't even move from my bed. And then the next day, or like, well, Monday morning, I went to help stop evictions with other workers and allies and people in encampments. Then I went back to bed, and then I could not get up. And I just laid there and mourned for the loss of my colleague that I was, you know, close to for 17 years. Yeah. But then the next day, it's like, I got to go back. I have stuff to do. I have an outreach shift to go fulfill. I have obligations, and I'm going to just carry these people with me. And so that also, that honoring of people's deaths is also that fuel that this shit has to end. And so I take that with me. Like, this is not just me. It's like with all of them. And there's a lot of them. Yeah. So yeah, that's probably what keeps me in it.
It's interesting you use the word spite, but I wonder the way you talked about people stealing knowledge. It's about appropriation. And I'm wondering if the thing you're calling
knowledge extractors.
100%. I'm wondering if what you're calling spite might be better understood as a resistance against knowledge extraction and appropriation, right?
Yeah, it's knowledge extraction, it's appropriation, it's researching people to death. It's, you know, it's like making everything a pilot project. There's no, they might critically theorize about, you know, people on the streets and watch them like a petri dish, but then they're not critically theorizing about the academic institutions and how they're building their careers off the backs of marginalized people. And they're taking money that they're not even saying like, oh, we shouldn't take this money should actually go to this project. Like way back in like like I can't remember when this project started, but we didn't have any money for overdose prevention for naloxone programs here. So we were bringing naloxone in ourselves from the US, and we were distributing it illegally. We probably distributed like 10 to 20,000 vials of naloxone, and we were training people on overdose prevention. Meanwhile, this doctor got a huge grant for millions to do a project looking at overdose education and naloxone. And it was like, why does he get $1.5 million to do this project and we get $0? And you know, that continued. Pharmacists get $10 for each kit they give out, $25 for each training, and we got $0. and that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, that's where researchers and academics, they have a responsibility to say, we recognize communities aren't getting this money. We shouldn't be taking this money. If anything we could do is maybe help support them and do like an evaluation of their project would be better research. Just give us that fucking money.
It's interesting because two profs that were on my PhD committee, Sally St. George and Dan Wolf, all their work is about research happens with people in the moment. Research is not in the lab or academia, that you're doing living research. Like we're figuring it out. I just know when Tara was running, I think the biggest social housing project in British Columbia when this hit. And when they first figured out, they created their own protocols for what do you do when two people go down at the same time. That didn't come out of a lab or a university or anything. That came out of frontline workers and peers and people's like friends figuring out how to do that, right? Like all the research. I like that idea that like research is something moment to moment we're doing with people. Like that is valid research, right?
Yeah, and coming from the people who are saying, hey, this would be beneficial and helpful. You know, there's a lot of research projects where, you know, that one that came out of Vancouver from the BC Center of Excellence, where they're studying people on their money that they get. So when they get their checks. Yeah. And so it's like, who cares? Yeah. You know, people just need more money, actually. And maybe you don't need a giant research project to show that that this small amount of money, when you're poor, you're just going to blow that money. And it's going to be at the beginning of the month, and you're not going to have any for the rest of the month because you never have any money.
I think about a bunch of academics that are situated like me, who got invited by Calgary and the government in Alberta to, quote, research the overdose prevention site so they could close it. And they knew exactly what they were getting their check for, to give validity and add their degree to saying it's okay to close this and murder people, right?
Yeah.
We got to kind of take it all on. I'm wondering what you're making of any of this, Tara, because I know you're in the same struggles.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's, yeah, the reason I asked the question and what keeps you in the work is I'm always trying to figure out how to help people stay in the work, also help keep myself in the work. And I can absolutely resonate with grief, anger, and honoring those that we've lost is what keeps me in the work. Also, what keeps me in the work and doing it at the pace and the level that I do is the privilege of being able to work in Vancouver and being able to push each envelope. Like being in Vancouver, I was able to help start up like the world's first safe supply vending machine, right? Because no one's gonna say no, or if they say no, we'll just move it into a different building. Like there's just so many ways that we get to like push back. Because you have to, that's one of the ways that you trickle up, right? Is where I get to push and make those spaces, other spaces show up. And then part of my frustration also in the work that I've always done is just the over-researching of the downtown east side and just how many careers were made off the backs of people dying and how much money that could have actually gotten us maybe not into the problem that we're into now with so much homelessness, as if we would have put some of that money into what actually would fix the problem as opposed to researching the problem, right? And it's so weird the way that past happened. Right now, I'm a part of 3 major research projects because I just said it was bullshit that they weren't involving peers. So with some folks at the BC Center of Substance Use, we've been able to do what's called overdose peer research assistance. So the only way to get people on doing research and getting voices is they have to pass an ethics exam. But to pass the ethics exam, you have to have access to a computer and the 12 hours it takes to study and understand the language. So we broke down the ethics exam and turned it into like a 6-week workshop that is now recognized by 3 universities. And so what we're trying to say is you can't do research in the downtown east side unless you have a budget line for research assistants who are like from communities. So start changing the conversations that we're having with research, because research isn't going away. So I just want to disrupt it. I want to tear it down. And I'm not the one that's going to tear it down. It's the folks that, you know, in the communities that we work with. So I like to hear, you know, that obviously it's not the first time someone's trying to tear down research. And so just that act of resistance across everywhere is it's nice to connect to.
I love that.
One of the things I wanted to do was just revisit one of your lovely public rants. One of the things I talk about with a lot of workers I'm trying to shoulder up in this is about the difference between anger and a just anger, and also rage and the need to out our rage.
Yeah.
And also the idea that that you have to have the right witnesses you have to be heard. And I just thought this one clip is beautiful because you get heard by all your witnesses and so unheard. You have to work really hard not to hear Zoe Dodd on a rant. You got to be kind of special to find a way to have that not land. So I just maybe you could set up what we're going to just listen to.
Maybe we should do research on that.
What's that?
We should get money to do research on that, how people are able to choose not to hear the words.
Yeah. How is that possible? Yeah.
I don't know. I would love it. I wish they would tell the truth, but yeah, I was gonna say one thing about the research disrupting. I love that research assistants, because we also, like, there's a lot of research assistants here with people lived experience, but nothing as concrete as like 3 universities like recognize that. And like I do think that we should be involved in knowledge production and also make sure that it is like going to be beneficial for what we think would be beneficial. And so I think that's great. So
I could just add on that, you know, Linda Tahuai Smith, who's Maori, wrote a
Aww.
Arresting drug users, putting them in jail where they overdose and die. We have people ODing and dying in our jails who want naloxone inside. We need drug users not to go to prison. We need them not to be arrested and to get conditions that don't allow them in the services that they need to keep going to. That is why we need decriminalization. And I'm sorry you're not brave enough and that you actually agree with the conservative government who was here yesterday saying that we don't have the supports to follow a Portugal model. Are you kidding me? We actually have so many supports in this country that we could support people if you actually help them. But it feels really, really bleak right now. Well, you're hopeful. Well, the rest of us are watching our communities be decimated, and we're supposed to sit here politely and take it. Well, I'm sorry, we can't take it anymore when we have to go home to our communities and they're fucking dead. So I would say to you that get some bravery and do something that's actually going to be a policy that will help us, because right now it feels like we're never going to see an end in sight, and you can't send someone to treatment if they are dead. And so the toxic supply is killing people. We need people to get access to those drugs right away. We need a Good Samaritan Act that actually works. We need police to stop following people, and we need them to stop arresting people for consuming drugs. And no, you are not shitty if you use drugs. And no, you're not a horrible person if you decide to stay on them, because you guys probably drink alcohol, but your alcohol isn't poisoned and killing you like it was when we had prohibition. So I'd say when you leave here, actually implement some policies which won't kill people, because we cannot continue as business as usual, and we don't want your stigma campaigns, because the stigma is criminalization. You're angry enough to let you should be furious, and so should other people in this room who have lost so many people, because my heart has never been so broken, and I haven't lived with this much grief in my entire life, but I've always known overdose, and I've always known someone who's died, but I've never experienced the kind of carnage that's happening in this country. And this symposium pisses me off, because this is not a dialogue when you want to continue to do the same things. It's not business as usual. So get a grip. And we can't walk together if we're dead.
Thank you for your comments, and questions. I would also your listeners and please thank the analysts and thank you to the audience for the presentation.
I'm just so moved by every time I hear you do that. I am just so moved by it. And I really like to show the end of that clip to just show the massive wall of silence. I can't imagine how hard you have to work to not understand that.
Yeah, it's that feels really emotional watching that. Like I have watched it many times, but you know, this in the last 3 months we've had 1,033 calls to EMS for overdoses and 25 deaths last month, and they're like people we know. And
that's the highest in years, right?
This is the highest since September 2017 for 1 month in Toronto, and that's just like what EMS recorded, so it could be much higher.
Yeah.
And it just, yeah, like they ask us to be in these spaces but they don't actually want to listen to us or implement what they know will work.
Yeah.
And so we just get invited to these things, and then you're supposed to sit there politely and take it in and follow their rules and follow the way they want it to be done. But there's no willingness to actually come to the place where we want to be at. And so, you know, I often wonder, why the fuck are we even there? And also it is structural violence. We're experiencing violence when we're in those places. And people laughed at the end. And I think they laughed because they were really uncomfortable, like seeing someone get so angry.
Yep.
Possibly people laugh when they're uncomfortable, but
well, when they're laughter means a lot of things. I also think they know that they are tied to that and they're culpable.
They're culpable, and they laugh because they want to make light of something that made them feel really bad. Well, they should feel really bad. They should feel more than really bad. Like, they're fucking responsible for the deaths of thousands of people and the continued incarceration and oppression of people for what people put in their bodies. What
did it take for you to do that, to speak up there? That was a contentious space. That wasn't, you created a space, you weren't given a space. Like, no. They had all these controls to not have it be a dialogue. You know, what did it take from you to do this?
Anger. And just listening, like feeling like, fuck this, like for 2 days, like just anger. I was sitting next to the Assistant Deputy Minister of Health. She was sitting right next to me, you know, and I just knew, like, you want to close something that thousands of people depend on, like, fuck you. Yeah. And so that rage was like, and everything spilled out of me. All the things I was thinking through that whole session just came out. Like, it just came running out.
I use it teaching all the time because I think it just shows such a brilliant analysis that this is another way to do knowledge. And that, like, this is a fantastic critical, this is not someone losing it. This is somebody putting it together for you in a way you can't,
you're welcomed
into. I thought it was the best of teaching.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the other thing that was really cool is, you know, Garth Mullins is one of your witnesses. He's standing up there. You know, you're not, you know, they want to isolate you, but you've got, you know, you're sitting there with great solidarity.
I mean, we sat together. That was the other thing. We were all sitting together. We were all looking at each other. We were all talking to each other, whispering to each other. We were all feeling it. We were all feeling really, like, aggravated and upset by being at the symposium. And you feel like a pawn. Like, you're just there as a pawn. And so I think that all of them being there too definitely, like, helped feel like it was safe for me to get up and say something, because they're feeling it too. Yeah. Like, I'm not alone in this. We're all talking about it. And
there's a lot of solidarity for you and the right.
There is.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think when we get up and speak and we have that opportunity and that platform, it is important to try to think of all the, like, what are your demands? What is it that you want? That's what I think about. What is it that I want? What do I want to teach them, this room, in this moment? What is the truth? And so that for me is like, you know, when I said the thing about alcohol, I knew I was going to say that before I stood up, because I thought that is what this room needs to hear. Yeah. This has happened before. This has happened to their people. Yeah. And I wanted to, so I used that, knowing that analogy was going to be effective, because it's true and it's the truth. Yeah. And so politicians and all these bureaucrats and ministers, they don't tell the truth. Our job is to tell the truth. And that's what I want to do in the work I do. Like, we're bearing witness. We're also the truth tellers.
Yeah. Sweet. Tara, I'm just wondering about your reflection from that.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that since the last time when you and I did a workshop together. It feels so real still, right? Like, it was kind of hard to watch. Because I feel like I've probably normalized what I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, and I can't even believe that we're right back where we were. Like, it almost feels a disservice to everybody that we've lost. But it's also like, so it was hard to watch that, because I think, just like kind of reflecting what Zoe was saying, Vancouver and other places are experiencing similar, not to the same level of a spike, and numbers reflective of what it was years ago. Something that I connect to, though, in listening to you speak about it is, if ever I'm asked to speak at anything, or if I choose to speak at things, I only bleed my trauma and my grief if there's a teaching moment or a call to action. Like I'm no longer being tokenized and being asked to speak, or just because I'm being asked to speak. Like I'm taking more space so I can create more space. And so, yeah, so I'm just no longer bleeding grief and trauma all over unless there's a call to action, or yeah, they don't get that from me anymore. And I feel that that's something that I picked up from what you were saying both there and then in your reflection of it. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to really thank you for this conversation. I just find it's just great to honor some of the things that have helped you do this, because I think it's easy for people to, write it off as anger or other things are motivating, but it's a lifetime of work to be able to speak truth in those moments so brilliantly. That is oration. That is teaching by speaking. That is the Socratic method at its best, right? And the asking of questions, what are you going to do? I thought it was beautiful.
And that's what popular education is. And that's like what I believed when, I got to meet Justin Trudeau, and I got to ask him about decriminalization and legalization by being at a vice panel. I didn't just use that opportunity to ask my question. I asked my question, and then I asked a rebuttal. And I made sure, like, when I was asking and talking about it, that I talked about things that could, like, educate people in that moment, so that people could understand there's other ways of thinking about this that could help you understand what's happening in a really basic way. You don't need a degree. You don't need to be an academic. You don't need a research project. We just really need to talk about it really basically, because it is really basic. It's made more complicated, but it isn't really that complicated.
Yeah.
When people say it's complicated, it's like, it's not really.
Yeah.
But it's just that
harm reduction is about dignity. Like the basic tenet of harm reduction is dignity. If you do dignity with people, if that's what you're organized around, it all makes sense. It's not a fight. Like it's so there for us, right?
Yeah, definitely. And we just have to really believe it and be in solidarity with each other. Years ago, we started a harm reduction workers union because we wanted to make sure, and we had everybody in it, because we wanted to make sure that we were all fighting for each other. And we don't call people peers out here, because we're like, why are they called peers? It's just like, it's just a job. And when I started, I made sure, like, I got all of us to switch our job titles. And then when we were targeted in our workplace by our boss, we organized a union together. We made sure that all of us as harm reduction workers, people who were quote unquote hired as peers, were in the union, and we fought for each other to make sure that we had better wages, because the biggest problem is, like, poverty is one of the hugest issues for everybody. And so we just, like, fought for better wages. And I think for me, that is also harm reduction is about being in solidarity, and in all of the different ways, not just around substance use, but all of the roots. And that's why I love this work, because there is that possibility to not just get stuck in seeing it as, like, behavior change. It's not behavior change.
For that. Well, thanks so much for this conversation, and thanks for being
thank
here.
you.
I just maybe we'll just circle out. Just if you could maybe we'll start with Tara. Just any of your thoughts on being here this hour and what you're kind of leaving with.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what today was gonna be, but I don't think I know how to say no to invitation from Vikki Reynolds, so I jumped on it. Yeah, it was nice. It was nice to take a moment, and I feel like I've just been really action oriented, just not even in the past couple months, but just in general. So sometimes to just take pause and reflect, and so I appreciate that today was a bit about talking about why we do the work, what makes us stay in the work, kind of re-jazz us again. I feel a little bit, I feel more hope at the end of this meeting as we did at the beginning. So I thank both of you for that.
Yeah.
How about for you, Zoe?
Oh yeah, no, thank you, Tara and Vikki. Like, this is really important. It was weird. Vikki asked me last week how I was doing, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm actually okay, which is weird because this is pretty wild times. But I really appreciate the opportunity to reflect and to talk about this. And it's important. It's really hard for us to stay energized. It's really hard. This is really hard times we're working in an overdose crisis. We've dealt with so much loss. We all have so much trauma. Like, I don't think any of us thought we would spend our time reversing overdoses. I never thought I would be pulling so many people out of bathroom stalls in my life, or losing so many friends and yeah, it's never thought that that's how this would be, and it is. But the thing about COVID is that we all know how to act. We all know how to lean into a crisis and how to work through one. So I'm watching other people I work with really struggle, while the people I work with in harm reduction are just like, this is what we do.